Epcot has been my favorite park going back to when I was 8 years old in 1984, but it's on the ropes. It needs help. I've got a few thoughts on how to improve it. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society Podcast. Welcome to episode 110 of the Tomorrow Society Podcast. Thanks so much for joining me. It's Dan Heaton. This is going to be a bit different from the normal shows here at the Tomorrow Society. Instead of me having a guest today, it's mostly just going to be my thoughts. If you listen to episode 100, I had some listener questions on there. One of them asked me what I would do if I was in charge of making decisions on the future of Epcot and had an unlimited budget. And I went through some thoughts that I had about what I would do, mostly in Future World, and spent a decent amount of time on it. But as I was giving those answers, I thought, this should be its own podcast. It took me a little while to get it together, but here we are. This is my podcast. Well, who knows? This may lead to more in the future, but this is my podcast now about ways that I would look to improve Epcot. And I'm not going too far with the unlimited budget. I know that given the COVID-19 pandemic, there aren't going to be a lot of new projects. I'm kind of thinking this as setting up a plan for what I would do in a situation where a few years down the road, whenever that would be, I don't want to make assumptions there, where I had the budget and we were expecting more, at least closer to normal crowds at some point in the future. But I'm going to take some chances, but a lot of it's going to be kind of working with the framework of what we have now. I'm not going to consider the neighborhoods. They have not been put in place yet. So I'm kind of thinking of it as starting with what is in place right now. What are decisions I would make that are sensible, but also kind of fit with my idea for Epcot? I promise this will not just be bring back every original attraction ever. There's going to be some elements that I want to bring back, and I'm going to have fun with that. But this is not just, I'm a huge fan of Epcot Center from the early days, but I promise this is not going to be an hour plus of me just saying, wow, wasn't Horizons great? That'll be a little bit of it, but I promise that won't be the whole thing. Another part of this is I had reached out to you, the listeners, asking for your thoughts. And I'm really excited that so many of you participated. I got email messages on Twitter and Instagram, also some MP3s that people left, which I'm going to play some clips from those. Thanks to all of you for submitting your ideas. That's going to make this so much more for me, but hopefully for you too, because instead of it just being my long monologue about what I think, I'll start with a lot of that, but then I want to go into not only some ideas from you, but I also want to respond to them and think through them. This will not be a case where I give all my thoughts and then play all yours and that's it. I'd like to make it more, I'm going to go through my general plan with a lot of detail for Future World and World Showcase, and then I will talk about your ideas and connect that. And I think it's going to be super fun. I can't wait to dig into it today on this show. One thing I wanted to mention too is that I do a monthly show for members of the Tomorrow Society through Patreon, which is a lot like this type of episode. It's called the Tomorrow Society Bulletin, and I'll pick a topic every month, and some of them are about history. Some of it is looking at the future. Some have to do with things on Disney Plus or other things I've been reading or listening to that could be interesting. A variety of topics, but it's just me talking about what I think about the parks and sometimes on the latest news more than what I do on the Tomorrow Society podcast. So that's something that if you like this, that might be something to consider. I also have some bonus episodes. One is all about Spaceship Earth. Another one is my favorite distinct attractions. And then I've done a few quick hits, which are just short podcasts. I also just did one with my thoughts on Splash Mountain being changed to Princess and the Frog. Spoiler alert, I like the idea, but I have a lot more to say about that in the episode. If you're interested in this, and also it makes a huge difference to help to support the show, tomorrowsociety.com/member will give you more information. It really helps to keep this show rolling along. Well, I am so ready to dig into my ideas. So let's do this. Let's talk about Epcot and what should we do with it? What would I do and what would you do? This is going to be great. All right, let's start by talking about generally how I view Epcot and what I would like to see happen. And I wanted to clarify a few things up front, because given what's currently happening in our culture, there is kind of a connection between certain people, I think it's a small but vocal group, that loving old Epcot Center also is a very conservative political idea. It kind of connects two things that to me aren't really related personally, which is enjoying Epcot and what it is or what it was, and also having a very conservative view in general. And so looking at it more like kind of an elitist place, like it's for the super smart, rare thinkers rather than for all of us. And I don't look at Epcot as that type of place. And I'm not picking on anyone in particular. I'm just talking in general. I want to be clear that when I talk about some things that I really enjoyed at Epcot Center and even over the years, I'm not thinking of it like, wow, it was so smart and now it's stupid. It's more, here's what connected with me as a fan and the things that I enjoy, and here's why I think some of them could still work today. Now, a lot of this is probably not realistic given the current state of Disney Company, but that's okay. This is fun. I don't expect that I'm going to submit these and some of them are going to actually happen. If they do, it'll be a coincidence. So to make that clear too, this is a fun exercise where we all get to talk about what we think is cool or was cool at Epcot and how we can make it better for us and just make it even cooler. And I know I just said cool a bunch of times. But you see, that's kind of the way I look back to the original. And I'll give a really quick background about me. I know you've heard this before if you listen to the show. First time I went to Epcot, I was 8 years old in 1984. I was a big fan of Star Wars and Star Trek. The 80s was such a haven for science fiction, and Epcot fit that way for me. It had just cool technologies that I'd never seen before and ride systems and had stuff about space and the future and transportation, and it just was so much fun for me. That's the thing that I always connected with. It was never that Epcot was boring. It was a fun place for a kid to go to. I think that's kind of been lost over the years, especially with this kind of perception that Epcot used to be boring and now it's fun. Yes, there were parts of it, like the film and Universe of Energy in the middle. Maybe Symbiosis, though I really appreciate what that movie did. But there are parts of it that might not be thrilling for everyone. But there was a lot of it, especially the rides and the big Future World pavilions that I loved. So that's kind of my background as going into it. So no matter how hard I try, I can't separate myself from that interest in that time. If the first time I ever went to Epcot was in 2008, for example, I would not look at it the same way. So I have to look at it as someone who went then, but I've gone through each era. So it's not a case where I went in 1984, 1990, didn't go again until 2 years ago. I've seen kind of the evolution of it, whether I was a teenager in the 90s and then as an adult and then going with kids and seeing how they respond to it. So that's kind of the way that I look at it, as from every era, but especially going back to where I started. But overall, my approach to this is not just to go backwards. That's why I'm trying to look at it as, where is Epcot now, including the projects that Disney has already greenlit or at least talked about. I'll talk about those. I'm not going to choose all of them, but I do feel like when a project is almost done, even if I wasn't in charge in this imaginary world, I wouldn't just say, start over, I don't like it. I would find a way to at least connect it to what I'm doing and then look for other new things to even go further that way. So that's kind of my overall approach, is basically to honor the past, don't forget about it, don't act like it didn't exist, but then also to embrace the future of the park too. So in a sense, I'm looking to the past and what worked, and then creating a bridge that connects it to the future where you have things from both that can make it the park I would like it to see. That's really what's so cool about the Magic Kingdom, is you have newer attractions like Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. We'll soon have Tron. You have some new things, and then you have older things like Space Mountain or even Pirates of the Caribbean, Carousel Progress, the Tiki Room, so many other things, and they connect together and they all are part of one park. And that's what I'd like to see at Epcot, which there's still a little bit of that at Epcot with a few attractions, but I'd like it to be more seamless, where you don't have, oh, that's the old pavilion that the diehards love, and oh, that's the new thing. Let's make it all kind of connect in a cool way. Let's have the newer attractions adjust to be better, and then have some of the older attractions make a few tweaks to line up to them, so there's a coherence to it. Because that's a trick right now, and I know Disney was starting to address that even with the logos and with the neighborhoods, which I think is a little weird. But really, we need to have a unity to it. And just overall in terms of lands, I am going to just use the terms Future World and World Showcase, because I know there are challenges with Future World in that, in a way, we're not really depicting the future. And I could see you could make a case that you could, instead of calling it Future World, call it something to do with like Discovery Land, which we already have one of those in Paris. But I'm just going to call it Future World because I feel like a lot of the goal, there's still the buildings and even some of the attractions that do look to the future. It's more to just some way to sum it up. You can't get too specific with the land itself. So the Future World World Showcase, I like the way those two things line up. So I'm going to leave those for now because I don't think the neighborhoods really solve it. I think it's kind of a way to allow Disney to incorporate in a better way things that don't relate to the future, what they've really already done. And then also to put in more characters, because when you have things like World Celebration, you could do almost whatever you want. Even World Discovery, which I like pretty well, they seem more limiting, and I'd rather have a more open canvas. And if everything doesn't perfectly fit, at least there are elements of the future, kind of like in something like Spaceship Earth, where it looks to the past, but there is kind of a forward-thinking vision with what we do. So I'm going to stick with Future World and World Showcase when I talk about Epcot here. And I just want to start first with the entryway. In this case, this would be a very different statement if this was a few years ago, because I would easily be able to say, we've got to get rid of the Leave a Legacy tombstones. They're blocking the view of Spaceship Earth. We need to put in a fountain that more resembles what we had before. We need to make this area more pleasant and really have a cool entryway. Amazingly enough, Disney is doing all of those things. So it's funny. It's a case where Disney has actually taken what I would have liked to see, and I have not seen, we'll see what it ends up being. But the idea of making this kind of an inviting space where you come in, there's more green space, there's more places to sit down, there's a really cool fountain. The fountain is fine before, but closer to Spaceship Earth, kind of fitting with more how it was before. There were not real issues with the entryway, but you take what we had originally, you make it more pleasant, more like an urban garden, and it leads us well into these, because, these pavilions are so imposing and so massive. And that's only going to be the case more with the Guardians of the Galaxy building, which needs a lot of help. I'll get to that later. But you need to make the walking spaces around them feel more inviting and feel more calm. And I think Disney was aiming to do that even with Moana Journey of Water, which I know may not happen and probably isn't going to be a part of what I'm going to do in the future. But overall, I like the idea of incorporating more green spaces, making it feel less like concrete and metal, make it feel more like a futuristic city garden, essentially, like a fun place where I want Epcot to feel, to me, not as much with the greenery, but a little bit how I feel now in Disney's Animal Kingdom, where I just love hanging out in that area. And I feel like with these wide pathways, Epcot is good in that way, but they need to make it just feel more inviting. And that should be a focus across the board in both Future World and World Showcase, but especially in Future World, as you need to have from the entrance all the way around, whether it's through cool logos and signs that match up to each other, removing weird, tent areas that just block views, which I know they're doing, but find ways to make it just be a cool place where you can, especially during the festivals and such, just grab something to eat, grab something to drink, hang out somewhere that I would like to go if I lived in Orlando, which of course is true of Epcot, but make it even more like the mix of when you see certain sci-fi movies and they look at the future, and yes, there are gorgeous buildings, but there's also gorgeous landscapes too. So we need to find a way to kind of line that up. And I think Disney was planning to do that with some of the World Nature area and even with that Festival Pavilion, which I don't think that's the best use of our time, is something like that, which seems I know Disney has pretty much canceled it already. I'm talking about the building that was going to be back on the other side of Spaceship Earth. To me, that seems more designed for corporate events and not really designed for the people and for what I'm trying to do in the park. So I'm fine not spending money and resources on that. I would like there to be more of a focus just on making the area nice and having live entertainment. And I don't mean a DJ spinning while Stitch and Lilo dance like I saw when I was there in September, right near Mission Space. No, that doesn't fit. We need to have things that fit in the area, but also just kind of stick to the background, that aren't jarring, no dance parties. That's a rule I'm putting in. This may sound like an old man here. I'm 44, but we don't need dance parties in Epcot unless you could do something cool in kind of the test track area, or maybe you have something where music plays, but no typical, when I say no dance parties, I don't mean make it boring. I mean just no DJ spinning, characters dancing, stuff that just feels totally out of place and could be anywhere. Basically, the Incredibles dance party, which, it's fun. I like it in Tomorrowland, even though that doesn't really fit there either. We don't really need that. Let's make it fun, but let's have it fit within the area however we can. But I do like the idea of sprucing up live entertainment. And again, all of this fits with making it to be beyond just the rides, a place that we just want to be in and we just want to hang out in. And I think the new entrance Disney's proposing is doing that. I hope they don't cut things back too much due to coronavirus. But regardless, beyond just cool landscaping, make paths that make sense, make signs that are easy to follow. These are things that you might say, well, Dan, this is kind of boring. This isn't really what I was looking for. We'll get to it. Don't worry. But the first thought is everything needs to align correctly in Future World. We need to have it where it's an easy place to get around. The logos all make sense. There's connections between pavilions. It all flows well. And that's something I'll be looking at as I start to talk about individual attractions. How does it all flow together? And what can we do to make that happen? Okay, let's move on to Spaceship Earth. This will be partially repetitive from episode 100, but I promise this is a lot more detailed. The trick for me will be holding back and not just going for 30 minutes on Spaceship Earth, because I don't want this to be a 3-hour podcast. It's definitely going to be a long one, but I want to respect your time a bit more than that. So first of all, I know that Disney had made plans to rehab Spaceship Earth to focus on storytelling. This was a reveal that Bob Chapek gave last year at the D23 Expo. It was set to close, but due to the pandemic, but now it's opening in its current form. So basically, I wonder if that's ever going to happen. And I'm setting that aside. I don't feel like all the ideas were bad, but I think it's a little cute. I feel like Disney is trying so hard, like they don't really believe in the concept of communications or even innovation. Some of those related to the past sponsors, and they tried to say, well, let's make it more Disney, to quote Bob Chapek. Sure. However, I also feel like it's a way to potentially bring more characters in. Spaceship Earth doesn't need characters. Spaceship Earth is the IP. It's the brand, and Disney should understand that. There's a reason so many people buy those shirts or anything else that says thank the Phoenicians, and there's other elements to Spaceship Earth that people love. People love the smell of Rome burning or the chariot that was there at one point. Tomorrow's Child. So many elements of Spaceship Earth are their own thing. Disney needs to embrace Spaceship Earth as a classic attraction in the vein of Haunted Mansion, Pirates of the Caribbean, the best things that Disney can do. It's a Small World, kind of those things that Disney might make tweaks to. But in general, and I know It's a Small World has characters put in it, but still that kind of fits more. But still, Spaceship Earth needs to be treated with reverence. And I don't mean that means don't change it. In fact, there are a lot of things that should change, especially looking at the most recent version. Things I like about the most recent version. The Ascent has some really good changes. Everything looks better. I almost forget how much better certain parts look until I watch ride videos, even of the Jeremy Irons version, which I love. There are some really cool changes and better animatronics. The computer scene is great. The music from Bruce Broughton is incredible. A lot of great stuff. So we're not trying to throw that out. Again, I'm going with the idea of honoring the past and the future and everything in between. So what I'd like to propose is a classic version of Spaceship Earth, essentially a tribute to the entire history of the attraction and what it could become in the future. No sponsor. We're not going to worry about that. Again, we're treating this like a classic Disney attraction, one of the top iconic places you want to go. And places you want to go should not spend their last little portion with you staring at a screen. You don't do that in some of those classic attractions. So that's the first step. We don't need those. They're not helpful. It's dark in there. We don't need to be looking at anything. There's so much happening in the sets and everything else. Don't have us look at the screen. So those come out. And I do think those were removed from the concept art we at least saw that Disney proposed with all the light and the power of light and all of that. So that's good. But going back to the beginning and kind of getting more to the concept, I love the idea, and I don't know with rights issues and with everything else if this was ever possible, but let's have multiple narrators. Let's have clips from Walter Cronkite in the past, from Jeremy Irons, or maybe Jeremy Irons records something new since he's still active. And Judi Dench, she has good parts to her narration. There's others we could lose. I don't know if we could go back to the first version. One, the quality may not be so good, but maybe you have a short introduction from that, or you have one clip. And if you need to kind of sum it all together, you have a new narrator. And it sounds weird, like why do we have all these different people? I just think that each person brings something interesting. And it also fits with the idea that Spaceship Earth has been good in every version. Let's use the best things of every version. So for example, we're going to bring back the chariot. I know it's a very small thing, but it represents a lot. The little touches that were cool. Now, granted, I know they've made changes to that set. I haven't gotten out the zoom and really brought it in to try and figure out, well, where would that go exactly? They'll find a way. A lot of the Ascent is so good that I would tweak the narration. I would add in a few more effects, but it does not require huge, basically just spruce it all up, make it look its best. You add in the chariot, you spruce up the smells, just do little things with the sound effects, with the latest technology, with music. Most of that still works. The little boy, turn him around, fix his face. He doesn't need to be as loud as jarring. Make him less imposing. You don't need to say extra, extra over and over. Put that guy there. That's another reference to the past. And a lot of the things still work from the past, and they've made a lot of good changes. I feel like a lot of the computer section is great. We don't have to mess with that at all. So essentially what you're doing is fixing some tweaks that didn't work from the previous version, and you're also honoring what's come up in the past. So we get up to the planetarium. As far as I know, the space station set is still there. Now, you don't just want to uncover it and say it's good. You uncover it, you put in new technologies. If you need to put in screens in a way to enhance it, something similar to Navi River Journey or other attractions like that, you increase what's in the star field, you make that more prominent. You make the projection mapping you could use on the Earth and everything up there could be awesome. You make that as grand and stunning as it should be. It's improved over the years, but you also used to have things like satellite projections up there. So I want to get to the top, and I don't want to think, it'd be really cool if that area behind me that's covered is not covered. Or I don't want to be thinking, wow, the Earth is really cool, but can't I see more things? And it's not to bombard us with stuff. You're not trying to make it a thrill ride. But let's make it as grand and majestic as we can. That planetarium is almost like the pinnacle of Epcot, the park. So you need to go and do it that way and set it up. Another thing too, as we start to head down, we're going to re-record Tomorrow's Child. We're not going to use the same version. It's going to be modern, kind of like they've done with O Canada at times and everything. And that's going to play. We're not reverting everything back, but we are bringing out the sets as a starting point from the Jeremy Irons version. You're having that song play. Then you're also improving those, enhancing those with the latest technologies. You're making that as a framework because they fit well in the space. Some of the technologies are still not that prevalent, but you, again, improve on those. Make it seem like a new attraction. So you're using what we've had in the past, making it seem like a new attraction. I mean, Tomorrow's Child was in Epcot forever. A lot of people heard that. A lot of people know the song, but it's still, that song is not just a theme for Spaceship Earth. That's a theme for all of Epcot, and it still could work. I mean, the idea that we're trying to build a future to inspire for Tomorrow's Child, I mean, right now, given everything that's going on in the world, it would seem to be that a lot of things we're trying to put in place are for the future generation. Ultimately, science coming together, creating vaccines, treatments, everything, and then us finding new ways to, whether it's working, going to school, how we interact with the world. I'm talking when this is over, or at least when it has subsided. I don't want to use the term return to normal, but all of that connects to the idea that we are trying to make this world better. I mean, Epcot's a theme park. I understand. But it doesn't mean you can't have a strong, positive message about how the world can come together through technology, through each other, through the sense of community in the park. You can do both things. Spaceship Earth, that has always been the message. It still resonates in every version. Why not create something that all comes together? And as we get to the post-show area, which I know Project Tomorrow kind of has some good things, has some other things. Again, I'm not trying to revert back to any previous version. But what I think you want to do there is you want to put your best foot forward. So we don't need to have a driving simulator in there. Let's look at basically in all these pavilions, like I'm not really recreating Innoventions or Communicore with my ideas here, but I would like each pavilion to really focus on its post-show areas, which were so important, meant so much to me at Epcot Center. Don't ever make them feel like they're phoning it in, or that they're just like your basic things you can do that people are just going to blitz out of. Make that a component of the attraction. So like, you saw with Earth Station where they would have previews for other attractions, kind of like now what's happening at the Epcot experience. I mean, you don't need to do it on that level, but make it something really cool, or an area where people can congregate, or maybe you can have special presentations, something you might have had at Innoventions or Communicore. Really use this area to the best of your ability. Make it an interactive place that is a destination for people, that people get off the ride and like, oh, I can't believe we're here. I want to spend another 30 minutes here. Use that space. Real estate is very valuable at Disney. Don't waste it. And that's what I think about this area and a lot of areas in Epcot Center, in Future World especially. It's going to be something that I'm going to revisit over and over. Do not waste your space. So on a similar note, we're going to turn right. So basically, if you walked in either facing Spaceship Earth, we're going to turn to our right and we're going to head over to the Seas Pavilion. Living Seas was great. I understand why Disney decided that they needed to inject characters, but unfortunately, in the midst of doing that, they decided that the hydrolators and the pre-shows and the entire journey to Seabase Alpha was not important. They even, I think one of the worst decisions was allowing you to just walk right in the back, and it made the ride less important. Now, part of that was, of course, then you could walk into the gift shop, and there's a lot of, it was kind of an evolution that with the loss of the sponsorship just kind of slowly got worse and worse and worse. Now, granted, I appreciate that the attraction does take you into the aquarium. You don't have that weird situation where you would normally go to the hydrolators, like that short stretch where you just walk past it. And there was a lot of weird stuff for a little while there. However, Seas with Nemo Friends needs help. I am not kicking Nemo out of the pavilion because I feel like having characters that people know, especially given that Finding Dory was a sequel that wasn't that long ago, are helpful to teach people about the seas. So we're still going to have a dark ride. However, this dark ride is going to change a lot. We are not searching for Nemo who's lost. That is lazy. It's basically you just come out of it going like, why is Nemo always getting lost? It's like, we don't need to just do like it's not really a book report, but it's kind of like a recreation, like a bad straight to video sequel of Finding Nemo. No, we're not doing it. So there's going to be a lot of changes that are needed. The first thing too is that we need to have a lot more views of the aquarium. Now you can still have some dark ride scenes, but I don't want to spend time going through sets when I know the aquarium is behind them that is much cooler. So we need to open up as much as we can. I like the effect of going by the aquarium and having the characters sing Big Blue World. I think that's really cool. That can stay. We need to rework this attraction. It doesn't need to be the same as the Sea Cabs. We can have Nemo and his friends around. Why not use projections and have them guiding us more and giving us information about the aquarium, about marine life? Make it more that way rather than going by kind of a lame dark ride with a few cool scenes to get there. Make the aquarium the attraction that it deserves to be. So that's a big part of it. When you actually get into the aquarium, Turtle Talk with Crush can stay. However, one, that theater is really cramped and really warm and uncomfortable. That theater needs to be improved a lot to make it more comfortable and not like you're just squished together on benches. Also, let's make Crush's material better. Let's have Crush actually do more teaching about what happens in the oceans, maybe some challenges facing the oceans. Let's make it less about, just being a little cute and funny. Let's use Crush. Crush isn't going to become a professor. He still needs his personality, but let's find little tweaks to Turtle Talk just to make it, again, fit with the idea that the aquarium and the seas are the highlight. And let's just look in general with the exhibits around too. If I was Disney and I was trying to update that, which they may be doing, I would be sending Imagineers to the best aquariums in the country and the world. And I would be having them see, well, what really works well at the Georgia Aquarium or aquarium in Boston or New Orleans or so many others. What works at the best aquariums in the country? Let's not copy it, but kind of do like we did with the Animal Kingdom. Find the best things, put our Disney spin on it, keep Nemo involved. I love the manatees. They shouldn't go anywhere, but make sure, again, like I talked about the use of real estate, make this a really interactive, fun place to be, like your best aquariums and science centers, and really make it seem like it's an ongoing thing. Things don't feel stagnant. You're making it up. Yes, it's going to cost Disney some money. They're going to have to hire some marine biologists and other people that know their thing to give presentations, to be more involved, but it'll be worth it because that is a draw for people in that corner of the park. You want people to spend a long time there and, make the gift shop amazing, and I will say too, sure, it would be great to have the hydrolators back. Maybe you have that like they used to do with the exit where you can take it. You don't have to, but you can. I don't know, the way the dark ride is set up, I'm trying to be at least fairly responsible. So I like the path of the dark ride. I just think a lot of changes need to be made to make it more about, hey, Nemo is, let's see the characters. Let's talk to the shark. Let's see the jellyfish, but let's make it more about what they can teach us and still have references to the movies, have it be fun, but don't make it to the lowest common denominator, which is how it feels right now. To me, that is the worst dark ride in Epcot, one of the worst at Walt Disney World, and it shouldn't be because there's a lot of potential there. So let's shift over to the Land Pavilion. Let's start off with Awesome Planet. It's fine. I don't really have a problem with that being there. I think that Disney did a good job. If Circle of Life were there, it'd be another situation. I feel like we can leave that. I'm okay with it. I don't have a big problem with that part of it. I feel like there are bigger fish to fry. The land in general is a lot closer to where I want Epcot to be already. So the tweaks are very small for the most part to this pavilion. So in general, I think Disney could do a bit more sprucing up to make the area feel less like a cafeteria. Especially, I love Sunshine Season's food, but it's not a very inviting place to sit. It's kind of squished in. I think these are minor tweaks that I would make, but I feel like you need to make everything just feel a bit nicer. I think you could do something with better background music, for example, that really fits with the area in general. Yes, some of it could be Soarin, but there's some great music for Living with the Land from the past that you could put in. There's just a lot you could do to make this just a more inviting place. But Sunshine Season is great. The changes are really minor to that area. Also fairly reasonably priced by Disney standards. Next thing, Soarin. Okay, Soarin' Around the World fits more in Epcot, but I feel like is a big step backwards for me. Soarin' over California, when it was really going, and I might have called it my favorite attraction at Epcot. So I don't know operationally exactly how to do this, but I think Disney needs to show both of them. Now, could it be a case you have 3 theaters? I would assume that it would not be a case where everybody just wants to see California. I think a lot of that is more people like me that really enjoyed how relaxing it was and the feeling you got on it and just the way the music fit so well and the lack of the weird transitions. You didn't have the bending Eiffel Tower and those types of things. I just love the look of the film, even when it was scratchy. So I would want to ride that almost every time. But some people won't. Soarin' Over the World is a little more intense. It has some grand scenes. I don't like the CGI. And I feel like the music sometimes hits and doesn't. It's not Bruce Broughton's fault. It's just that he was kind of working from its own template. So I would simply set it up where whether it's, you get in, it'd be great if there was no fast pass. You could just set up 2 lines and work from there. But essentially there's a point when you choose which one you're going to do. Maybe it's up front and you have a card with magic bands and everything. This shouldn't be that difficult. And essentially you're picking, and obviously there would be some challenges. If Disney sees that 2 out of every 3 guests are going to California, 2 of the theaters show that, 1 shows Soarin' Around the World. If it's the opposite, same way. But I think you should have the option, just also like we've seen with like Star Tours, The Adventures Continues. Customization is good. I don't want it to just be we don't know where we're going, but I love the idea that you get to pick. And also they need to make the queue area nicer. It's kind of boring. And even when you get down to it, it's very uninviting. So I think, a lot of it just could be actually just cranking up the air conditioner a bit in certain parts, but really just find ways, whether it's through adding exhibits about the history of flight or about the Earth or whatever, just make it a more pleasant experience, more immersive, not something that's so dull. The music is great. You just need to make some tweaks there. But I think the biggest thing is not having, Soarin' over California for a little bit and then Soarin' Around the World. Now, just make it where you get to choose. And guests, it's also going to be great for locals and repeat guests to have them be able to do that. Finally, with Living with the Land, I love this attraction. And I even like the recorded spiel. I think it's really relaxing. You're not at the kind of whether or not you get a good host or not who's excited. I like it. The things I would do, though, I do think that it would be nice to see. They did recently update the film, which I thought was really cool. I'd like to see more activity where there's still kind of questions about really, are they doing much research? Are they not? I know I've seen people in there doing research. Let's do more of that. Let's find a partner that there and really put some effort, kind of like I mentioned with the Living Seas, really build that up. And maybe even, there's an area inside the land that is a really cool area that I think you could do presentations on and stuff. There's like a stage and everything. Really beef up that side of it where you're actually, there's a behind the scenes tour, but maybe you have special events inside the Land Pavilion. This is also true for the Seas. let's really beef up the educational side, and you still make the attractions fun. I also do think that there has to be a way you could incorporate a new version of the song, Listen to the Land, or an older version, even if it's just playing in the queue, or it's just in one little part. It's not taking over, but find a little way to, again, honor the past, but move to the future. I love Living with the Land. If you didn't change anything, I think it'd still be amazing. But just find these little ways to kind of show that they are doing forward thinking. That's why I don't want to make it seem like I'm just talking about reverting back. I actually want to see in both cases with Seas and the Land, a more looking to the future and to technology and to education while still maintaining the components of the attractions that we love now. Living with the Land's a great boat ride. I think there's a lot to it. I think it's inspiring. I think it's relaxing. It's necessary to the way the park works. But let's find little ways to beef up kind of the side of it where we really are doing some education. We really are learning new things. Hey, maybe you didn't know about this. Hey, we're going to have this special event at the Land Pavilion on, let's say the park closes at a certain time. At 7, we're going to close the ride. But if you sign up for this ticket, you can go at 8 p.m., take a boat in, and then sit in some chairs and receive a presentation. There's a lot of different things you could do like that I feel like Disney is missing opportunities, and you can work with the scientific community. You don't need to get a full-time sponsor for every attraction, but find ways to collaborate like we see a lot of local science centers and zoos and others do. These two pavilions have a perfect way to do that and still maintain the fun and Disney side of it while also doing more than just the basics. As I continue through Future World, I've come to the realization that this is too big for one episode. So I'm going to split this into two parts. You may have already noticed this by seeing the title of this show being Part 1. So here's how I'm going to split it up. I'm going to continue now to finish Future World West, but essentially this first episode will include, like you've already heard, the introduction, the entrance, Spaceship Earth, and Future World West, which of course includes the Seas, the Land, and Imagination. And then the second episode, which will arrive next Monday, is going to include Future World East and World Showcase. And then some thoughts at the end, kind of on an overall basis. Both episodes are going to include listener input relating to those areas. It's not exactly lined up, but I'll do the best I can. Some of the overall statements I may do now and then do later. I'm going to split it up pretty evenly. So when we get to your input, if you don't hear what you've submitted, there's a good chance you're going to hear it next week. It may seem funny for me to bring all this up in the middle, but I wanted to bring that up now before the episode just ends. And you're like, wait, Dan, World Showcase. We'll get to it next week. I promise I will give full attention to everything. I think splitting it up will allow me to, one, not bombard you with a 3-hour show, and two, to give good attention and not feel rushed to each area. On that note, speaking of an area that needs a lot of attention, the Imagination Pavilion. I think when a lot of us look at Future World and what we'd like to see changed, imagination is one of the first things that comes up. Yes, you hear bring back Horizons, and I'll talk about that in the future, but imagination is one too that really stands out. Unlike something like Test Track or even Mission Space, where essentially a new concept is either taken over the building or replaced the building, Imagination's weird because it sort of is like it was originally, but it's not. Like it's changed and been updated, but each change seems to make it worse. Now, granted, there have been 3 iterations of the attraction, the ride, inside the pavilion, and the third one is not the worst of the 3. But still, it's a step backward from where it started. But I want to save that for the end. Let's start with the Magic Eye Theater. Now, I wrote a blog post a little while back about 5 ways you could fix the Magic Eye Theater. Nothing has changed, of course. Here's the deal. One of Epcot's most impressive and popular pavilions, especially in the past, should not be showing Disney and Pixar shorts in its theater. They should have something that really relates in some way to the concept. And when you have a concept like imagination, sure, you could say those shorts convey imagination. I think that's true. But I want there to be something that I can only experience at a theme park. So there's multiple ways you could go here. The easiest one is say, make a new film. I would like to do that. But in the near term, I'm kind of thinking this as of a multi-tiered approach to the Imagination Pavilion. The first change is something that could be done quickly and immediately would improve the pavilion. So that is to remove the Disney and Pixar shorts. And I love the idea. If I ever do an episode on Tomorrowland, I'll talk about Circle Vision 360. I've written about this before. I love the idea of making these filmed attractions rotate. And I don't mean rotate like Impressions of France and the Beauty and the Beast sing-along that I will get to in part 2. I mean, have things that have value and mix them up. Take advantage of the fact that this is a filmed setup. And yes, with the 3D theater, you do have different effects and different approaches to the different films. So I'm not sure you would have a case where you would go, okay, we're going to have this for an hour, this for an hour, this for an hour, this for an hour. You might even rotate it by days or half the day one way, half the day the other way. You would want to give a good feature to whatever you're doing. There's not going to be anything that's shown once, which is just insulting to people that like it. So in terms of this, my starting point would be you take Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, which kind of fits timely, especially if there's going to be a reboot of that. It times up perfectly. But you start with that, and then also use Magic Journeys, 2 3D films right off the bat. But you know what you could do, especially with Magic Journeys? Add in some extra effects, add in some smells, add in theater things. There's a lot more we can do now where you use those films as a template. And I don't know how good Magic Journeys is going to look now with modern technology. If possible, remaster that. So you have these 2 films. This kind of fits along with my looking back to the past, but bridging to the future. So you start out with these 2 popular attractions, especially Honey, I Shrunk the Audience. Now, your thought could be, well, what about Captain EO? I've enjoyed the Captain EO attraction. I thought it was cool when it came back for a tribute, though it stayed for a long time. I think that's a challenge given Michael Jackson and revelations that have come out in recent documentaries. I'm not making a statement about truth or not, but there is enough evidence there that I think Disney would want to shy away from, again, connecting to Michael Jackson now. So that's the reason I don't think Captain EO would be a great fit there, but I completely understand on its own, separating from Michael Jackson, why it might make sense to put it there. But so my thought is you start out with those 2, and then you start to begin production on a new 3D film. Now, granted, when that is created, you don't just throw out the other ones. Kind of like what Disney has done this with Soarin' over California, but they bring it back for limited engagements. But again, it's one or the other. It's around the world or California or something. Kind of what I talked about with Soarin'. Make it more customized. Make it where it rotates around. Make it where fans can come in and make it their, especially locals, the annual pass holders. They may go and say, I really want to see Magic Journeys that's playing that day. I might just go there for that. And then they stay for dinner and then they buy merchandise, whatever. So you're doing this rotation in order to, again, offer another way to entice guests to come. And when you create a new film, that even draws more. And yes, that may get more precedence, but I would hate to just remove the others. Now, there are a lot of things like with actors paying and rights and, how does that work out if you're using these multiple things and all that? That's beyond what I'm going to talk about on this show that I even understand. But I know that plays a role with bringing things back and reusing audio, video, all of that. And who knows, if Honey, I Shrunk the Kids comes back and is again successful, maybe you make a new attraction connected to that fits. Now you'd say, well, wait, Dan, do you really want some IP there? If it's done well, in this case with imagination, if you're doing something that kind of fits with something imaginative, okay, I just don't want a lazy approach. Another thing you could do here is special events. You could have a special 3D showing of something from the past or something new. I feel like, and I haven't made this too much about the post-COVID world, whatever that is, basically the next steps for what things become. But I think you're going to need to come up with more special exclusive experiences in order to draw people. Disney does some of those things with DVC member events, annual pass holder events, special sneak previews of movies, but I think they need to use this theater, and I'm not talking about just previewing new movies. The sneak peeks are, again, kind of a lazy approach. Those don't bother me as much as having the main thing be Disney and Pixar shorts. However, why not have some special events? Why not use this theater and show an old 3D movie? Or, if you have the rights to it, bring in Avatar and add a few effects for a limited run. There's so many different things you can do in this theater connected to imagination, and you can make it special events could happen in here. And if you put in the right technology that's fluid and flexible, which I know may be a challenge, you may lose some of the effects of something like Honey, I Shrunk the Audience or Magic Journeys, but there are ways to compensate for that, and we saw that with the Captain EO tribute. So really, I just want it to be a place that can be flexible, customizable, and offer a lot of different things and not just be stuck being like, well, it's air-conditioned, you get to watch a few fun shorts. That's not enough. Okay, let's move on to the upstairs. I'm sorry, DVC members, you're getting kicked out. I am sure that Disney can find another lounge somewhere or another area that is for you. This real estate, I talked earlier about how space is so valuable. This space here is too valuable to use for a DVC lounge for resting. The view is incredible. Also, I need the space downstairs for my ride. So this is becoming a new version. You call it the Imageworks because people know what that is, but a new version. If there's a few things from downstairs that work still, a lot of the things don't work very well, we can find a way to bring them upstairs. Bring a few things, maybe a rainbow tunnel, which is, of course, would be a hit for Instagram. Hate to talk that way like I'm Bob Chapek or something, but it's true. And you make new things that connect. You have a variety of different games, different fun productions, kind of like what I talked about when I mentioned Spaceship Earth's post-show. This needs to be something that people really get excited about as a destination. And the original Imageworks had that, where it had a variety of different things you could do, including, the blue screen games. And then you also had the drawing and then the tunnel. Just don't phone it in, Disney. This area could be something really cool. And if you have to put one character greeting up there, but if you're going to do a character greeting, I'll get to that in a moment, what I would think. I have a better spot, I think, for it, but I understand that they want to put it up here. But in general, I want my Imageworks upstairs. I think everyone deserves to see the views of Epcot that you get up there. It also expands the impact of the pavilion. Again, I'm going to be cutting out the gift shop down there. If you want to put the gift shop up here, a small part just to draw people. Can't be as big as the one we have now. Do what you need to do, Disney, but I want this to be a cool area that really draws us in and that we find interesting and exciting. And as you can see by the fact that I spent more than 10 minutes talking about imagination without talking about the actual ride, there's a lot to cover in this pavilion. So let's get to the ride. I have such mixed feelings on this. And again, I am not one who's going to say put in the old attraction as it was. However, this is a case where you can call it fan service, you can call it just playing to the old Epcot Center fans, but there has to be a way to create something. Again, when I talked about Spaceship Earth as Disney's brand, I feel like Figment sells enough merchandise and is used on enough different things like Flower and Garden Festival items so much, yet somehow Disney hasn't done Figment justice in the attraction. Also, I think given the graphic novels they've done and just a lot of the people that think back to that original attraction, we're going to bring Dreamfinder back. So first of all, one of the biggest issues I have with the current attraction is it's too short. The original Epcot attractions, one of the great things about them is they were longer. And that's what I mentioned. I needed the space from the Imageworks. So we are going to make the attraction longer. Probably it'll end up being about 10 minutes. So we're going to use that space to extend it. There may be a case where you're still entering and exiting in a similar spot, but it kind of veers off to the side and then comes back. So this is going to be something that costs a bit of money for us. But again, I am going to make a new version We can use portions of what we currently have, but only a little bit here and there, the best stuff. Like, we don't need a skunk. We don't need Figment showing us eye charts. This is not going to be a cheap overlay. I would say we could use a lot of the current track, but we are going to swap out a lot. What we are going to do is create something new that includes elements of the original attraction, a few elements of the current one. Some people love the current one, so we don't want to lose all of it. And then new elements that often pertain to that steampunk, imaginative aesthetic. I don't mean we're going to create the story of those comics. Instead, we are going to create a new story that, again, we're not giving you a tour. We're gutting the Imagination Institute stuff. I just want to see a really cool dark ride where we get to explore different elements of our imagination using the latest technology. So a lot of things that what I'm taking from the original is the idea, kind of the different types of things we see, where they kind of go through science. They show them in the theater, and they show all these different venues for imagination. I love that. I think that works out great. There are also some really cool sets that convey that. And I think let's go crazy with it. Let's just do tons of color and trippy. Think about Meow Wolf did this kind of crazy attraction in Colorado. I'm not saying we should use exactly that, but what I appreciated about that was how imaginative and out of the box it felt. Now, I don't want to have our Disney guests in here being like, what is this? Some kind of, trippy head trip or something, or, it doesn't need to be like something out of the 1960s or whatever, you get where I'm going. But I think you can make it, why not use the best technology we have? They bring in some really visual art directors that work in the fields of animation. That's not a surprise that certain former animators like a Joe Cicero created some of the more inventive attractions like a Roger Rabbit or Disney's Toontown and all of that. You have people that really have that sense of color and style and presentation, and you bring them in and just let them loose. This is where I would spend a bit of money. Let them loose, but we would still use Dreamfinder and Figment, and that kind of leads me to the general idea of them becoming so important to this entire corner of the park. If we're going to focus on imagination, this isn't a case where they just kind of show up and Dreamfinder's like, hey guys, I'm back. No, they're part of the entire story, and that's where it's a new story and has a new look and has new technology, but still kind of fits with that idea of Dreamfinder creating the Figment and them taking you through different elements of imagination and really just blowing the doors off of what we can do with animatronics, with sets, and with screens, projection technology, everything thrown together into something that basically is like a standout Disney attraction that could be in place for 30 years. I know that's a little vague. I need to get the guys from Marty Called or something on there to just take over and really run these concepts down. But I think you get the idea of what I would want to see here. This is one of my main changes that I would like to see. The biggest one in this episode from Future World is this change. It's going to be the most expensive. It's going to take probably several years to complete. But the end result, and that's another reason I wanted to swap out the movies right away, is you're already making an update. You're putting in something interesting. You're using that space well. And then, you might not be able to, you're going to have to shift the upstairs and the area around that. And then there's some point in the future where maybe you create an entrance to the upstairs while the downstairs is still being worked on in other parts of it. Final thing is a meet and greet. I think that Dreamfinder needs to be a character you can meet. Figment needs to be someone you can meet. My thought was you put them in the area that right now is the Disney Visa holders meet and greet area. Now, granted, that area is really small. So the trick is you would likely have to create some sort of larger queue or entryway there because it works out so well because it's so small and it's only Disney Visa and most people don't know about it. But you'd have to expand that and make sure there's space. Or you can have them outside, but I know that can be a challenge given just the heat in Florida. Or you could put them upstairs. And that's something I kind of referenced earlier. If you really, you don't think that other area is a space, you don't want to lose the Disney Visa thing, maybe put them upstairs. But regardless, I think Dreamfinder and Figment, in order for them to become a bigger part of Epcot, especially Dreamfinder, they need to be meet and greet characters that you can meet and interact with and have fun. And those are things that people are going to share videos and pictures all over the place. They're going to continue to grow. And that all fits with the idea of this attraction and the whole pavilion. This becomes kind of one of the exciting, most popular pavilions in the park. Because I think about Spaceship Earth is already very popular. I think the changes will continue to keep that. I think the Seas in the Land are popular enough, and I think my changes will just make them better pavilions. But kind of, if I'm looking at Future World and where beyond Spaceship Earth, where people are going to go, I'm looking at Imagination. I'm looking at, the new area where Universe of Energy was. And then a big change that I'm going to reveal next week that I think kind of in that other corner, and of course Test Track, but you kind of want to have some new areas that people are really going to be drawn to. And this is one of them, and I think it's going to please both new fans and longtime fans. This is not going to be dull. It's not going to be boring. It's not going to be super educational, actually. Just going to be super fun and magical and represent the best of what Imagineering can do. Now we are going to transition to your thoughts. A lot of you sent in what you'd like to see at Epcot. So many great ideas. And first, I just want to say thanks. When I put out the request for your input, I thought, well, I hope people submit things. And you totally came through. And I'm going to play a few voicemails in a bit. And some of the thoughts kind of cover the entire thing of Epcot. So I'm going to mix those in this time and then next time, because really the focus of this first part ended up being Spaceship Earth and Future World West. So some of these you could basically slot them in either way. I am going to stick with everything from World Showcase, if possible, more next week. So I'm going to try and just address as many of these as I can. Some of you created really long recordings or sent really long emails, and I'll try to address multiple points that you sent, but I also want to make sure that this show doesn't devolve into me reading really, really long messages from people. A lot of the input that I got related to spotlighting new technologies or doing some things that Epcot used to do, a lot focused on the Communicore interventions kind of idea. And I am kind of looking at it more as, for me personally, not rebuilding interventions or Communicore, but incorporating that idea into a bunch of different post-show areas. I mentioned it a little bit with just what I would like to do even at the land, with special events, with the seas and focusing more on the oceans, and then with Imagination having a really cool upstairs Imageworks. So I'm kind of thinking of even further, and I'll talk about this more next week, in that when you get to some of these areas that are focused on transportation or space or whatnot, that you use each one of the pavilions kind of as Communicore on the whole. But here's a quick comment I got by email by Jim Caserta, where he said, I had a thought on Epcot. Have Disney highlight what they are actually doing. The first thought was their solar farm. Second, their massive Wi-Fi and communication network. There are likely more things that they are actually doing themselves. And I think this is a great point from Jim, because if you think about it, Disney did get some press when they announced they were expanding their solar energy, and obviously just what it takes to operate Walt Disney World, whether in the Magic Kingdom, the Utilidors, the computer systems that operate everything, the trash, the way they handle water. There are some really inventive things that were inventive even in the 1970s, but things they are still doing now that I'm not sure I know about. And I do think it would be really cool for Disney to, in some way in Epcot, whether it's in its own pavilion, whether they ultimately could use the Odyssey area, events area for something like that, or even in post-show areas on various sections where maybe, you could find a spot in the Land Pavilion where you talk about what they're doing in terms of conservation. I know they're doing a lot of that at the Animal Kingdom too. So there's a lot of different ways that Disney doesn't even need to totally, in this example, partner with another big company. They are doing a lot just to keep Walt Disney World operating and Epcot operating that could be really interesting if presented in kind of an entertaining way. And I really like that idea from Jim, in that essentially you're saying, you may not know this, but we're already employing, and I know Disney has said this before as marketing, that Walt Disney World essentially is Walt's idea of Epcot, but we're doing a lot of things that are on the cutting edge and have pushed industry forward. Thinking more of the post-show areas, here's a comment I got on Twitter from Ellerbert. I had a couple thoughts about things I'd personally like to see. Like many others, I'm sure I'd love a return to the original Journey into Imagination, though I'd be totally cool with an updated version rather than a full restoration, given how far Disney has come with animatronics and dark rides. They could really marry the best of 80s nostalgia with new technologies and create something timeless. The post-ride area could also have some sort of feature about Imagineering, with hands-on activities and exhibits, maybe even a gallery of concept art. The Imagineering story brought to life. And I want to zone in on what she said in terms of the post-show area, because I think that's a cool idea, whether it's in Imagination, whether you put it in the Odyssey Events Pavilion, but to really do something interesting, especially now with the Imagineering story and a little bit with One Day at Disney, where they're focusing kind of on what people do behind the scenes at Disney. There's not as much of a, well, we make magic idea. They really have shown the great things about what Imagineering does and even some issues they've had in the past. So when you're looking at great things, you could have an exhibit that shows maybe how they do their early work in terms of visualizing the design, like with hands-on activities where you're creating something kind of like a very advanced, different version of when we used to be able to design a roller coaster. So again, you're grabbing a part of what was Communicore and Innoventions and putting it in a specific post-show area. And I love the idea, too, of Imagineering not seeming like something that is so far removed from reality, but is really down-to-earth, grounding thing, which also is going to inspire more people to get into that industry and even just related industries, not just Imagineering for Disney, but creating themed entertainment or anything like it based on maybe something that they see in this park. So I think it's a really good idea. I'm now going to mix it up a little bit with an audio recording that was submitted to me by Patrick K, where he is talking about a different spin on the idea of characters at Epcot that I find really interesting. Here is Patrick K.
Epcot needs more characters. Wait, until you hurl your computer against the wall, hear me out. Characters at Epcot aren't new. No, I don't just mean the introduction of the Fab Six. I mean that the designs of Epcot were themselves classic Disney characters. When the monorail opened in 1971, it got as much press as Mickey Mouse. Likewise, Epcot's Spaceship Earth could be considered a character as much as anything, as can the hydrolators in the Living Seas, the crash test dummies in Test Track 1.0, the bison in Living with the Land, the back alleys of Morocco, and of course the Dreamfinder. These elements clearly have a loving fan base. They also justify why people just never got Epcot. I feel these elements can be among the pantheon of Disney-certified legends, but what they need is love. Why not turn more classic Epcot designs into movies, animated series, or more merchandise? Orange Bird and Figment are big hits these days. Where's the Tom Morrow plush or the Horizons Disney Plus show? Epcot is fine with cartoon characters, but Frozen and Ratatouille should complement Epcot's true beauty, not replace it. They should appear as additions in simple cameos rather than replacements. After all, did Anna and Elsa add character to Maelstrom, or simply take away the cool Vikings and trolls? If I were in charge of Disney, this would be the first thing I'd do. Give all areas more thorough backstories. Put something new in the Magic Eye Theater. Reinvigorate Journey into Imagination, of course, but with a significant fan-focused presence. And use cartoons to plus the park for the little ones, but integrate the elements carefully before giving up and gutting something amazing. Epcot will never be what it once was, and perhaps that's for the best. But there are all kinds of little touches which will preserve the sanctity of the original vision. The Epcot Forever fireworks show is in the right direction, but it's just a start.
Thanks, Patrick. The thing that I really find interesting about that was kind of something I was getting at even when I talked about Spaceship Earth, was the idea of the brand or the IP being some of these classic attractions. And I know he got into a little bit about Anna and Elsa and Frozen and Maelstrom. I will talk about that plenty in the next episode, and even just characters in general. But I think the idea that Disney has kind of missed a bit is that there is value in some of the things from their past. I think they're starting to get it. Like I mentioned with the Imagineering story and some of the presentations, they did a really good job presenting Epcot in a fair way and an interesting way and having some really cool footage. And Epcot Forever, like Patrick mentioned at the end, does a little bit of that too. So I think I would like to see Disney do more things that honor the past, like I talked about to Bridge the Future, but also treat what they've done in the past as part of the brand. It doesn't just have to be, here's our movies over here, and then we're going to take those characters and bring them in. And here is Epcot, the theme park from the past over here. And these things, we're going to grab from this bucket and dump it in the other. There could be some more merging, and Patrick said it much better than me, but I feel like it's an interesting idea. I don't expect it to happen, but I think it's a fun way to consider, to kind of flip it around a bit. Instead of saying, we don't want characters, we don't want IP, say, we've got some stuff already. Let's find a way to merge those in an interesting way, which Disney at times has done. Like something like Pandora at Disney's Animal Kingdom, I think does a really good job of merging characters into the Animal Kingdom, creating a land that works well in the park, but also fits with Avatar. More things like that, where in that case, I feel like they did treat the Animal Kingdom and its theme as something that has its own presence and theme and character, and not as something that needed to be replaced, something that could be merged together. And I think that's a really cool idea. Jim at Disney also had a couple interesting ideas that I enjoyed, so I'm going to read a couple comments quickly from him on Twitter. I have a huge list of current ubiquitous technologies that are magical. MRI is one that combines so many different technologies: magnetic resonance, superconductors, super strong electromagnets, high-performance radio receivers and antennas, two-dimensional fast Fourier transforms, and wires carrying so much current they jump, causing the characteristic bang sounds of MRI scans. So what he is proposing here is a basic video interactive kiosk at Spaceship Earth's exit space that has facts about MRIs using magnets 50 million times the Earth's magnetic field strength. Have a demo. That's a very specific example, but what I think he's getting at, again, is a way to present modern technology in an entertaining way. Here's his second point, another idea. Disney and Lucasfilm sponsor FIRST, a global robotics program for kids. Part of the FIRST LEGO League is an innovation project. Epcot would be a perfect place to show winning projects, hype the current season, and show off some very simple robots. LEGO could sell the kits too. They are quite simple to use, and once touch demos come back would be a neat spot to learn. In both cases, Jim also put some stories in there that I will post in the show notes that you can read further. I really like the second idea especially because I feel like Epcot, kind of like I mentioned earlier with having special events, what could they do to connect to technology and the way it's going in the future? And it's something Disney already sponsors. And robotics are super cool. It's a growing area. My daughter did a Lego robotics group that she was with, and they had a blast doing it. And there was a huge amount of kids that all were involved. This is not something that is just for a very small segment. It's really rolled into the mainstream. And that's where I think Jim's idea really hits on the point that why not connect that to Epcot, where it's not that far outside of your comfort zone. It's still entertaining. Lots of kids love it. If they had some more connections there at the park, it'd be a home run. It could really be fun for the kids that go that don't know about it. They could learn about it and also really hype what's happening at the park. I think, Jim, that's a really cool idea, and I would love to see it happen. Here's another comment that I received by email from Emmy, which was, I would love to see more ties to the SEA in Epcot like in Tokyo Disney Sea, but having more to do with science. I think this could work in the Seas Pavilion or the Imagination Pavilion the most. It's a really interesting idea because, in a sense, and I'm going to talk more about this next week when we talk about Guardians of the Galaxy and some related ideas there, that when we think in terms of characters, that we're thinking again in terms of Anna and Elsa and Guardians of the Galaxy and everything. But another way to kind of make Epcot more more Disney is to connect it to something that Disney has used very effectively in Tokyo especially, but also a little bit here with Skipper Canteen, is the SEA, the Society of Explorers and Adventurers. What's fun about that is it wouldn't have to be so blatant. It could be something where, like Emmy says, that you're teaching about science in a way, or it has more to do with science. So when you're looking at the Seas Pavilion, you connect it that way. Now, in that case, you would probably remove Nemo completely. That would be my guess. And then the Imagination Pavilion, I think, is a brilliant idea because you could even bring Dreamfinder back in and somehow kind of morph Dreamfinder into another representative or a person that works with the Society of Explorers and Adventurers. And imagination is a big part of exploring and adventuring. So I think that would be really fun in the Imagination Pavilion, or to even do something with the film and have little nods that tie into the attraction, which then tie into the other attractions that have been put in that way, like your Mystic Manor, your Tower of Terror in Tokyo. A lot of cool stuff there. That's the thing. It's not, when a lot of us are talking about changing or improving Epcot and trying to find different ways to do it, it's not the idea that we want to make it just a lesson about science or just an educational thing. At least for me personally, I don't want to speak for all of you. My thought is kind of that I want Epcot to be its own thing. And I like the idea of connecting it to other Disney attractions and make it just entertaining, where, the best attractions that even are giving you some education are also fun too. They're not mutually exclusive. The most fun you can have, like, you're learning things. Yes, Spaceship Earth, they have made the script a little simpler, but you're still learning things about history, but you're also having a lot of fun doing it. There's a lot of cool touches. So that's what connects with me there too, is could you make some cool touches that connects with the SEA and fit that into Epcot and make it all flow together? I think there's definitely a way to do that for sure. I'm now going to play part of a voicemail that was very extensive from Mike Fischetti. Thanks so much, Mike. I'm going to play a portion from his introduction about answering the question of how to improve or fix Epcot. And then next week, I will play a few other specific ideas that Mike had relating to Future World East and some of the changes there. First, let's start with Mike's point, with something I haven't really dug into too much. I've been looking at it more incrementally, pavilion by pavilion by pavilion, but Mike's point is a little broader and more expansive. So I'll pass it along to Mike to give his thoughts on what Epcot may need to get it where he feels it needs to be. So take it away, Mike.
To me, there are two answers to this question. There is the Epcot that we need, and then there is the Epcot that is doable in reality. And they are two very different, borderline diametrically opposed ideas. The Epcot that we need, now more than ever, is the original sort of overall idea of Epcot, but updated to our modern times. So specifically what I'm talking about is, if you let me fix Epcot, it would be a near total sort of tear down and kind of rebuild, which I know is impossible. If it cost $2 billion in 1982 to build this park, it would probably be on the scale of $10-15 billion to give this park the fixes that it needs. And so if you ask me, what does Epcot need? What is the park that we need? The park that we need is half of it that is truly future world, or at least a discovery land. The idea of half of the park being focused on edutainment surrounding the sciences and giving people a clear, concise, specific history of these different concepts here on Earth and in space. Just these different concepts of the sciences, explaining it into people in a way that is fun, entertaining, interesting, thought-provoking, and ultimately something that can benefit future generations.
What I found really interesting about this, one, I wanted to talk about this idea. If we're really going like we are in charge, we're taking over, I'm thinking a little more, I wouldn't say realistic, but kind of pavilion by pavilion, like I said. Mike says, we need to basically almost start over. Now, I'm sure that many of you share this opinion, and I totally understand. The idea that really to make Epcot fit with even its original spirit or some sort of new spirit relating to sciences, you can't just make little tweaks. A lot of the ones that I've been presenting, you have to go big. And yes, Mike does even mention that the cost would be astronomical. You think about, though, what Disney did with DCA 2.0, where they did spend a lot. But most of the changes they made were to the entryway and with Carthay Circle and everything. And then, of course, with Cars Land. A decent amount of the other changes, there were some, were pretty similar. So DCA 2.0 did address some big issues with the park, but there still were areas in DCA that needed more help. And you're seeing even now where they're adding the Avengers Campus, and there's still some carnival rides and Pixar Pier, we won't get off on that tangent. But the thought is, well, what about like a DCA 2.0 type overhaul? But I think that's fitting more with what I was kind of thinking about. What Mike is describing is really almost starting with not an entirely new park, but pretty close in a lot of ways, because, and I think that is where you can really get into the fun in a way where you can just say, let's just take out Mission Space and put in Horizons, and let's put in the original Imagination. And Mike's not saying all that. I'm thinking more, let's go back to Living Seas and, a lot of the kind of go back to what it was idea, or let's build up. I know we've had several people say we should build Communicore in everything. So basically, in a way, to make it what it was, you don't have to go backwards, but it is kind of, we've saw some, David Patchell had kind of a similar idea in terms of interventions of Communicore. He sent me an email and he said, build a new building in place of what was just demolished, preferably back the Communicore name, but a new name will be fine. You can keep Mouse Gear, keep character meet and greets there, but the new West building is a rotating showcase of new technologies, interactive activities from worldwide sponsors. And I mention that because that's just one pavilion, but that kind of fits with the idea of we are going to really say, like, basically, it's going to put up your hand and be like, stop. No more what you're doing now. I'm in charge. Sit down, Bob Chapek. I'm taking over. And we're making some big changes. This is off the rails. A lot of this stuff is not salvageable. And I'm not saying that David or Mike is saying that. That's just kind of, I'm taking it from there and kind of going further and saying, wow, that's almost an entirely different podcast. But that's good. It's almost one of those things where it's like, what if I had, and that was kind of the original question I got, what if I had unlimited budget? And I kind of took it as, well, there's some good things, which I believe there are things that are good that arrived more recently. But I want to mix things in and kind of, basically, like I said, take from the past and push to the future. I love the idea, though, of just like, what would you do if you could just almost start over or really push it? And that is a very interesting idea that Mike puts out there. And he has some other cool ideas that I'm going to talk about more next week. Paul Lane on Twitter had a similar idea about interventions. He says, it's not cost effective, but a revamped interventions type attraction that they committed to updating would be perfect and fit into the park's intent. And I think that's a key point about updating it, because when we look back at Epcot, and I know that's really a different podcast, but Disney's point, you always, and I've heard many fans say this as well, it's about Future World. You can't keep it updated. You can't keep up with the technology. So we had to close Interventions, Ellen's Energy Adventure, Horizons, whatever you want to say, because they were dated. But that kind of sets aside the onus on Disney to keep things updated. I don't mean update every year, but every 5 or 10 or 15 years, finding a way to keep us engaged so that the lines do stay longer and so that it continues to evolve. Because I never want attractions to just sit in stone. Think of something like the Haunted Mansion or even Pirates of the Caribbean, where they added new effects. They added connections to the movies in Pirates of the Caribbean's case, not in Haunted Mansion's case, or they improve the audio. There's a lot of different things you can do. So I think that's when you're talking about something like Interventions, or even my idea about putting things in post-show areas, the thought is you can't do all of this and then stop. And that can be a challenge anywhere, is that if you make these changes, you have to keep moving forward. And then, okay, we made these changes. Now we need to start thinking about, in a year or 2, 3, 4, 5 years, what are we going to do next? And I don't mean what new pavilion are we going to build. I'm talking more about what changes we can make. So for me, I look at Interventions and I'm kind of like, oh, well, that's not really going to work with, David and Paul both brought that up. But Paul's point about updating, it will be a different situation, because then you're putting stuff in and they're continuing to change and evolve and use new technologies. And it doesn't have to be sponsored. It can just be interesting things like has come up on a lot of the ideas so far. So, but anything we do here, anything we talk about here, at some point is going to need to be updated and continue to stay strong. And if it doesn't do that, it's not going to work. So here's a quick and short comment from Redesigning DLP on Twitter. First of all, says, I would like to see more countries add to World Showcase. I will talk about that next week for sure. Bring back the education part, but update the current, future, and future world. Right with you. Or recreate the entire park in a Tomorrowland theme like the movie during the World's Fair part. And this is the one that I really enjoy because, one, it's not something I expected to receive, a point like that, but it's really fun, the idea of recreating something like the 1964 World's Fair and having in the original Progress Land or the Magic Skyway, Mr. Lincoln, It's a Small World, the whole deal. And I love the idea of just, okay, we're going to do all these other things that remind us of various other pavilions at the World's Fair. Now, granted, we are totally talking fan fiction here, even more than the rest of this podcast or most of it. But I love the idea because essentially creating some sort of retro future or even futuristic event, I know they can't do it, but something in the vein of the Stark Expo without the connections to Iron Man, just some sort of World's Fair. And of course, if you talk about Tomorrowland, I'm always going to be happy because I really like that movie. And I think its message connects very well to Epcot Center Rehab and some of the changes I'd like to make. And I don't mean its message trying to be very preachy or whatever. I'm just talking about optimistic future, that we have the ability to change things, the idea of even the smallest action can influence the future. That idea, especially in our current age, is something that I'm trying to connect with, and I think would be great to see at Epcot Center. But the thought of just one day, imagine like Bob Chapek comes on stage, like, so everybody, you remember that movie Tomorrowland? It was great, right? So we're going to not going to do the neighborhoods. We're just going to take this most of Future World and turn into that. And it'd be like 5 guys like, yes. And the rest are like, what? What are you doing? So I think it's a fun idea, and it makes me smile just thinking about the logistics of what that would involve and how that would come together. So I'm starting to wind this down, but I have 2 more submissions from you that I would like to talk about before we switch it up. And the first is from Tim Grassi. Tim has been a guest on the Tomorrow Society podcast a bunch of times. And the first time we talked was about fixing Epcot. And he had an article that came out on Mice Chat on December 24th, 2016 called Fixing Epcot. And if you think at the time, we were thinking a lot about Anna and Elsa and Frozen and a lot of the things that Disney was planning to do at that point. So first, I want to talk about a few things Tim said that made an impression. First, he just has its own paragraph. Epcot Center is dead. I think even since that point, we've all come to accept that more, especially given Disney's announcement about the neighborhoods. But it does make a point right off the bat that we can't circle back and start over. And then Tim also says there is no version of Epcot's future where characters and their intellectual property do not play a part. True. Unfortunately, like I said, some of the more broader, we need to start over kind of ideas, we could set that aside. But I think with the ideas that I was presenting, it was kind of like, okay, there's ways this can work. Let's look for ways that work. But most importantly, let's just find a way to go to the future with what we have. And I think that's what Tim's getting at here. So Tim's unifying theme that he wants to see is discovery. And I'm going to read a portion that he explains that. Discovery has long been rooted in the history of Epcot Center, and I think it can be brought back to the forefront. The biggest takeaway I have from Epcot Center is the iconic line penned by Imagineer Beach Boy Tom Fitzgerald. If we can dream it, we can do it. This line from Horizons plays up the human desire for exploration, adventure, and discovery. A reimagined park that plays up the human desire to dream, discover, and explore is certainly a unifying theme that is both specific in framework yet grand in scale. So this kind of fits a lot with what I've been talking about here. This idea that Epcot needs to focus on a theme, and I was sticking with Future World because I felt like I could still drive towards the theme I wanted while calling it Future World, because a lot of it is that idea of discovery and moving forward and looking in the future and being optimistic still kind of fits with Future World. It's also a known name, but I think Tim's idea of focusing more on discovery is something that fits a lot with what I was thinking. Now, Disney has sort of done that partially with their neighborhoods, where one of them was discovery. And I think Disney's thought was, this is a way to rope together Guardians of the Galaxy, play Pavilion, and the characters in there, Test Track, Mission Space, all in one spot. But I understand that overall, that makes a lot of sense. World Celebration, not so much, but I think I'd probably do another podcast on that. But granted, Disney at least was thinking in terms of what are the themes of Epcot and Future World that we want to retain, and Discovery was one of them. So I think that idea can be very strong, and there is likely a way, I don't know if you just call it Discovery Land, but that no matter what you call it, that is the idea that essentially we want this Future World area that can have a unifying theme. And that's the biggest thing for me. The neighborhoods don't really work great for me. You know, Tim's thought is even call it Discovery Expo, get rid of the neighborhood ideas. And I totally get that, because essentially you need to have a cool name. And the Expo idea also fits kind of with the World's Fair that I was just talking about a minute ago. Tim also had an idea for the Seas. He says, at the Seas, I'd love to see another James Cameron partnership and have something featuring the sea calves, but also special effects driven, where we can explore and discover the deepest depths of the ocean. Sure, it would also be home in the animal kingdom, but the aquarium is in Epcot, and I doubt anyone would object to that thematically. I think that's a cool idea. I think it fits with my point of focusing more on the aquarium. Now, granted, I don't totally get if Tim's talking about the aquarium somehow being made to look like it's deep in the sea, or if it's more the dark ride portion. I would love to have the dark ride portion where you're using some of the aquarium, but also before that, you're kind of saying we're going deep under the ocean and we're going to see some really amazing wildlife and find some amazing things. It almost kind of fits with the old idea of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. There's a lot of potential there. And given what happened with Pandora, the world of Avatar, and James Cameron, I think that the potential is really great for this kind of idea to really hit home, because as we saw, I don't know how much James Cameron, I mean, I give some credit to him, I guess, though I think more of it came from Joe Rohde, but still, they were able to use that property and make it something great. James Cameron is very interested in exploring, you know, through his documentaries and what he does really in the deep of the sea. So why not see if you can make that work? All right, we are going to close out part one. If you can believe it, this is just part one of this podcast with Wesley James, who writes at reverseimagineering.com. He sent me a story, a 3-part article series that he wrote in January 2017, the story, and there's way too much there for me to read. I will post the link in the show notes. I highly suggest you check it out. I may talk more about this next week. So let me just talk about one portion, and forgive me, this is a bit long, but I will probably not read the whole paragraph, but talk about it. So again, we're talking about wholesale changes, not as much specific attractions, but even the future of Epcot and what Disney should do. And I find some of these points to be very interesting here. So here's what Wesley says. Next, let's consider the guest in quotes. The in is what you ask people to accept ahead of entering the park or riding an attraction. For example, the in for a ride like Star Tours is that the guest is a passenger boarding a shuttle in the Star Wars universe. Importantly, The inn for the entirety of Epcot does not ask people to be anything other than themselves. This dramatically lowers the barrier of suspension of disbelief, allowing Disney to connect with far more guests outside the typical theme park demographics. If Disney brings Epcot to the same style as other parks, it'll be throwing away an asset that allows them to differentiate the property from competitors and, more importantly, allows them to reach beyond their current guest demographics. By bringing to Epcot the same types of experiences available in their other parks, they will also be competing with themselves. So that's kind of the first point he makes, which is the idea that something I've always kind of pushed back against, this Disney parks idea, that you have merchandise and ideas and all the parks are kind of the same, that any attraction could go in any part of the parks. And this is one that really came up again with Anna and Elsa. But in general, is just the idea that you could put anything anywhere in any park. And this is where you really need the parks to stay unique in some way. It doesn't mean you can never have characters in Epcot or Animal Kingdom or whatever, but I feel like Disney's done a good job with keeping the Animal Kingdom as its unique self, and Epcot is one that needs to be improved, and I think that's really interesting. So let me read a little bit more by what Wesley says. Start by allowing the central message of Epcot to guide its development. Secondly, resist the idea that every attraction should have a different story, in or IP. Keep the message consistent throughout the park, and importantly, vary the physical ride experience. This is on the last point, where he's making the point that you shouldn't have a bunch of IP in the parks. But what he does say is interesting, is he says, continue to tell the history and future of technology communication in Spaceship Earth with the slow-moving dark ride. Now keep the premise, but use different ride experiences for other attractions. The Universe of Energy tells the story of the history and future of energy, but radically change the ride system to a fast-moving roller coaster type ride. Now, granted, we know what's actually happened with that. This was written in 2017. But the point is, he says, what I'm proposing is a move away from an Omnimover park. And that's something I haven't really talked about much so far. And I think this is a good way to end part one here with Wesley's point. And that is that a lot of what I've talked about has been, what can we do to make the message stronger, make the theme more unifying, to bring it all together? What I haven't said as much about is, well, how are we going to vary it up more? And I think that part of that is coming from Guardians. But in a sense, do we need to, like with Imagination, for example, with my ideas, do we need to turn this into something that's more thrilling? And it doesn't mean thrilling like Mission Space that makes you sick, but something that has a different ride experience. Because again, I was kind of thinking in terms of, here's another Omnimover type. We're going to use the same track. We're going to use the cars that are similar. We're just going to make it longer and do some cool things. I still think that can work. But what can we do to make this experience not feel like another Spaceship Earth or another this? Because that's even the thing. We have Spaceship Earth, you're in the Omnimover, Living with the Land is a boat ride, Soarin is a hang glider. There's a lot of different things. But if you think about some of the other attractions, like what I was talking about doing with the Seas and Imagination and all that, still a lot of kind of slow-moving Omnimovers. And I have another one coming in part 2. So that is something we need to think about. And I think it's a really good point from Wesley, the idea that we need to have different ways to tell a story. And that may be with roller coasters and thrill rides, and may also be with Omnimovers. The variety is key. And that's good that all of us, just kind of as my last point, we don't get tunnel vision about what Epcot should be, what any park or attraction should be, that we can recognize that there are the best parks have all different types of attractions. Think about just the original Disneyland has so many attractions, and there's all different types, whether you're going in and just sitting and listening to Mr. Lincoln, or Omnimovers like the Haunted Mansion. You have roller coaster like Space Mountain, boat rides, play areas, dark rides, carousels, everything. I'm not saying Epcot should have all those things, but variety is a good thing. So I want to push for the theme to be more unified and stronger, but we also need variety. And I think that's a perfect way to sum up what we're going for here. So that's going to do it for part one of the Improving Epcot podcast. There's so much more to cover. I cannot wait. And I'll be back with you in 1 week with all of this. And also, too, I'm still in the process of recording. So if you would like to record some audio or submit your ideas, send them to me. Email me, dan@tomorrowsociety.com, Twitter, TomorrowSOC, Facebook, Instagram, Tomorrow Society. If you send them, by Wednesday, July 22nd, they will get in the show. So I know that's only 2 days from when this came out. You may not even hear this at this point, but I'm giving you an opportunity to submit if you've heard this and thought, I've got some ideas. Now, granted, I would like most of these ideas to focus on Future World East and World Showcase. But if you have some just general ideas about where you want Epcot to go, I think they could fit in too. It's just, we're not going to talk that much more about Spaceship Earth and Imagination and the seas and the land. Maybe a little bit, but really our focus in the future is going to be World Showcase and that other half. And there is plenty to cover on that other side over there between, Mission Space and Test Track and Guardians of the Galaxy. And then World Showcase has so much. So I suspect the next show will be as long or possibly longer. Contact me at all those spots with your input. I would love to know what you hear. Do you like this type of show? Was it fun? Was it a bit much? I would say yes to all of those probably, but contact me and let me know what you think. If you want to support the show, you can become an official member of the Tomorrow Society through Patreon. Get some really cool perks. It makes a huge difference. You can learn more at tomorrowsociety.com/member. Of course, ratings and reviews at Apple Podcasts are always much appreciated. Thanks to all of you that have done that. And mainly just if you like this, just spread the word about the show. I like doing things like this where I'm getting input from the community. Most of the time, these are interview shows, and I'm going to keep doing those. But doing something like this is really fun for me. And what made it fun was all of your input. So keep at it. It's going to be a lot of fun to continue this next week. And of course, next week's show is part 2, like I mentioned. And I'll be back on Monday with that. Please take care of yourself out there. If you're going to the parks, be super careful. Have a lot of fun. Let's all try to do our part to get us through this tough time. It's going to be tough for a while, but I think we'll get through it. And just remember, we're all in this together. We're all trying to help each other out. So please do what you can. Wear a mask. Follow the guidelines. They will help us to get where we need to be. Thank you so much for listening to this part 1 of Improving Epcot, and I will talk to you again next time.